Good
Good
day.
evening.
Yes, sir. How are you today?
I'm feeling very cool. The weather has been, that type that you want to stay in bed all day, not go to work.
You see, that's why you are doing the show from your bed, huh?
Oh, oh, Kwame, am I here, probably why? Just it's been raining. It's been raining heavily up here, and I heard it's been raining really hard in Accra as well. And
It has,
unfortunately, when it rains so hard in Accra,
yeah.
then it's a bit difficult finding your way. So
I
I
need
guess today
to
we have to settle to do it on the phone.
buy you a boat. All right. So today we have an issue that we need to talk about, and it's about worm infestations.
About worm infestation, yes.
Yeah,
I
one of
think,
our good friends shared a story, and I'll share it with you now. Uh,
yeah,
uh,
please do.
Lexis, I'm an ardent listener of Drive Time and the Drive Doctor segment. Mine is a simple wahala. Last year, there was a school notice from my son's school indicating all the pupils were going to be dewormed. I'm very,
Uh huh.
I'm very cautious about giving my children medicine, so I declined, and many
Oh,
disagreed with me. Now, this year, I'm not sure. I am sure it will happen again, actually.
mm,
But can the Drive Doctor shed more light on this deworming thing? So that's what we
right.
have to talk about today, Doc.
Right. So, good afternoon to all our listeners, and it's good to be um, with you again another Wednesday. So, I mean, you know that next week the future leaders are writing their first major exam, the BEC. It's
Right.
starting July 8th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And we have a
So,
candidate in there.
sorry.
We have a candidate in there, don't we?
Oh, we do. We have my son is actually in the constituency of PC Presbyterian College of Education demonstration school in Ekopong. Yeah, so I want to wish him the best of luck. I've seen the effort he put in to all his classmates and to all the future leaders. I remember many years ago, 1993. Uh, so, yeah, all the best to all of them. Right. And I mean, try to help them as well. Today, we are going to start off by doing some all biology as we talk about, or we try and see how we can help our friend. So, Kwame, let's talk about parasites. What is a parasite?
Mm.
Because worms are parasites.
Okay.
But Kwame, I've heard the word parasite being used to describe some human behavior as well. Also, human beings literally have been described as parasites. I'm sure you've heard that one too.
Oh, yes. The one listening also
So,
has a parasite, huh?
so Kwame, let's see whether or not we can get the scientific definition of parasite spot on. So, a parasite is an organism that lives in or on another organism of another species, and it benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. So, Kwame, living in or living on another,
Mm.
but it must belong to a different species. Critical point there. And it benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. I think it is the latter part of the definition that sometimes people use to describe other humans' behavior. When you derive benefits from me or you derive benefits at my expense, then we can describe that as parasitic behavior.
Right.
So, Kwame, worms are parasites, and there are different types of worms. We'll get into the details shortly. But broadly, there are three main classifications of worms, and the BC candidates, they need to know this. The first category, we call them the roundworms or the nematodes. And then the second category, we call them the trematodes. And then you have the cystodes. nematodes, trematodes, and then cystodes.
Nima,
Right.
Nima.
I mean,
No.
nematodes,
Is it named
and
after
then
Nima police station?
and
That's
then
okay.
trematodes, and then cystodes.
Okay.
So today we are going to focus on worms, the first category, which are the nematodes. And Kwame, I'll give you one example that most people would have heard about, the hookworm. So Kwame, most people would have heard about the hookworm.
Yeah.
It is an example of a nematode. Kwame, let me share with you some key facts why worm infestations is a big problem in most parts of the world, and why that deworming program, which is a collaborative effort by the Ministry of Health and the Ghana Education Service, is one of the best things that public health things that we have done in this country or in our parts of the world. So some key facts. Number one, worms are transmitted by, or the infestation transmission occurs usually by eggs, which are present in human feces, which contaminate the soil in areas where sanitation is poor. So it's a very important fact that we all need to pay attention to. So Kwame, the worms produce eggs. Worms are also microorganisms. They could be macro. You can see them with your naked eye, but you cannot find the eggs with your naked eye. So these are microscopic organisms, although, yes, some of the worms can be as long as 1 meter long, and therefore they become macroscopic. You can see them with the naked eye. Another fact I want to lay bare is an estimated 1.5 billion people globally, that is 24% of the world's population, are infested with worms. And this is WHO data 2024. Infected children are nutritionally and physically impaired. All right, so children bear the brunt of worm infestation. And again, we're coming back to why the school health education program or the school deworming program, because children are nutritionally and physically impaired. Lastly, these infections affect the poorest and most deprived communities with poor access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, so-called WASH, in tropical and subtropical areas, places like Ghana. So it is always the disadvantaged populations that also get hit the hardest by some of these things. And later on, you'd realize that the preventive measures cost very, very little, and therefore we have a good way to prevent some of the a very horrible condition afflicting the very disadvantaged population in our country. So our focus would be on hookworm infestation, which is an example of what we will typically call a soil-transmitted worm infection, because the other categories, they are not soil-transmitted. But our focus mainly is on the soil-transmitted worm infestation. So, Kwame, let's look at the hookworm. There are two main types of hookworm, and I will not frighten you any further with their scientific names. So, Kwame, you know that we give scientific names to all living organisms, whether they are plants or animals.
Yeah.
So there are two main types of hookworms, all right? But they share a common life cycle. And quite briefly, let me explain the life cycle. We'll start with the eggs. So the eggs are passed in stool. And unfortunately, it is one of the challenges that we have. I don't know about the recent demographic health survey and the census statistics, but I think the 2014 Ghana demographic health survey, when you look at Accra or Greater Accra region or so, there was a very horrible statistic about households that have toilet facilities. I think it was something about only 30% of households that have, toilet facilities. It was such a very horrible statistic. So unfortunately, open defecation is still a major problem in our part of the world. And the eggs of these worms are found in fecal matter, in the feces. So if you open defecate, then it means you are passing, if potentially you have worm infestation, you're passing the eggs into soil. And if the soil is loose, of the loose type, not clay, loose, moist, and warm. And when we know our temperature in our part of the world, we are in the tropics or other parts, the subtropics, the soil is always warm. And anybody who's done any poultry farming will tell you about hatchery. If you want to hatch eggs, you need to raise the temperature a little bit, and then you can hatch the eggs. So the eggs are passed in stew, which hatch 1 to 2 days if they are deposited in loose, moist, and warm soil. And then it produces what we call a larvae, or the larval form of the worm. So the first stage of that worm development is called the larvae. Then the larvae will spend about 5 to 8 days in the soil growing or developing into a form that can actually pierce the human skin. So, when you were growing up, you used to go and play football. That time, now you should boots. And today you have some form of footwear when you are playing football, my boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those times we all used to play football bare feet.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we are playing, and we didn't have any grass pitches. So as for grassless pitches, even the Premier League or even Division One, so we play in the soil.
Yeah.
So can you imagine that you are playing around in the soil, and this soil may be contaminated with larvae that have come out of eggs that were deposited because somebody was doing free ranging, as we have nicknamed it, nearby. And the wind blows, it will carry some of the soil and it will travel some considerable distance. So this stage of the form can penetrate the human skin, travel through the blood, gets into the lung, gets to the back of your throat, and then you swallow it, and then it gets into your digestive system, your intestines. Once it gets into the intestine, the worm then attaches itself to the inner walls of your small intestines. Kwame, if you know the morphology of this worm, it's got hooks. And that is how it gets its name, hookworm. It's got these structures that are described as hooks. And it would use these hooks to attach itself to the inside walls of the intestine, and it will chronically suck blood from you.
Wow.
So, Kwame, this is a life cycle. So imagine this very tiny little worm, and it can range, and then it grows. It can range from 1 millimeter all the way to 1 meter. And Kwame, if you think about 1 meter, that if you go to the people who sell the fabrics, that piece of wood, that meter rule or something that they use.
I see that.
Or something. Yeah, I just want people to think about that. That could be the length of a worm inside your intestine. All right? Growing up and chronically sucking your blood.
But,
so,
Doctor,
Kwame.
So, why is it that the body doesn't digest the worm?
Right. So when we put up the what do you call it? When we put up the fly or the teaser for this, one of my uncles, he sent me a message. He was like, our forefathers, they knew about this. Instead of the worm, they were drinking akpeteshi. That akpeteshi will just digest everything. Right. But Kwame, you see, every living organism has defense mechanisms or defensive mechanisms, a way to protect itself. To be a proper parasite, you always have means or mechanisms, protective mechanisms, that allows you to stay with the host. So that is parasitic behavior. So the worms have the ability to withstand all the different digestive juices. There's a reason why it attaches itself to the small intestine and it grows there. Because that environment, that chemical environment, is one that it can handle. It doesn't go in the stomach, because in the stomach you probably have a lot of acid in there, so it wouldn't go. But that is prototypical parasitic behavior. They have defensive mechanisms that allows them to stay in the host. So then we also then have to use our brain to find a way to dislodge them. And I'll talk about the school deworming program that Ghana has pursued for many, many years now, and also the routine deworming that we can also do in hospitals. So, Kwame, let's look at some signs and symptoms of worm infestation. And most of the time, we see this in children, not often in adults. The first point I want to make is that depending on the stage of development of the worm, depending on the burden of the infestation, the individual may be asymptomatic, meaning without symptoms in most cases. But those who have symptoms, you may want to find or look at around the feet. So the doctors would examine the feet of the individual. You may find a certain type of rash that has developed, and it is very pruritic. It itches, so the person will be scratching. So if your child complains that they have a rash and it is around the feet, because that is what is planted. That's a part of the body that will get into contact with the soil most of the time. Of course, you can roll around on the ground, and a greater part of your body will come into contact with the soil and so on and so forth. But typically, it's your feet. You are running around playing football, pilulu, and all of those things, jaskili, and all of those things. Your feet may get into it. So you may find a rash, an itchy rash in and around that area. When the worm travels and it gets to the lung, it may also produce a cough. It may produce difficulty in breathing and a noisy type of breathing we call wheezing. You may also have abdominal pain, which goes and comes. It waxes and wanes. So you may develop abdominal pain. There is a loss of appetite, anorexia, which is largely because this worm is just sucking blood, and the individual may become anemic. And one of the features of anemia is a loss of appetite. Well, I mean, you may also develop a lot of gas, although you haven't eaten gobe, although you haven't eaten a whole lot of eggs or something, but you get a lot of gas and you develop flatulence. It may be one of the symptoms of worm infestation. Some develop a frank diarrhea, an increase in the frequency of passage of stools, and also the consistency of the stools may become loose. You may also develop weight loss from chronic worm infestation. All of this parasite living off you, depriving you of nutrients, you may develop weight loss if you have chronic worm infestation. And then lastly, I think I mentioned it earlier, something we call iron deficiency anemia, because this parasite hooks onto the inner walls of your intestine. It's just sucking all of the blood. So, Kwame, these are the signs and symptoms that may characterize worm infestation.
Okay, good. A few questions are coming in. For starters, Budai in Jamestown is asking whether worms, do they mate?
What are worms?
Do they mate?
The worms can multiply. Yeah, they produce eggs. All right, so they will produce eggs, and then the eggs would multiply, and then you go on from there.
Doc, well, this one I'm going around. This question, yes or no? Do they mate? How do they produce the eggs?
Okay.
Do they mate? So you could be walking around, and then some worms will be mating in your intestines.
they can multiply. Yes, they multiply in there, so they can go from 1 to 10 to 100. And to the level where you can even get intestinal obstruction.
Wow.
The lumen of the intestine is all filled up with this thing, and then it blocks the intestines, the lumen of the intestine.
Interesting.
So let me quickly talk about
the
prevention and control measures.
Okay.
And land on that school deworming program that we talk about. So the key thing is to avoid the worm getting into our body. And if you know about the life cycle, then you know that it is going to start from some point outside and then it goes inside the body. So, number one, you have to observe basic personal hygiene principles. So, all this business about washing your hands after using the loo, um, it's very, very important because fecal matter, it's not what you see on your hands. We're talking about microorganisms, and the eggs that are in the feces you cannot see with your naked eye. So you may have fecal contamination if you don't wash your hand and then you touch the food, whether food that you're going to consume or if you're a food vendor, food that you are going to sell to others, then that becomes a big problem. So observing basic personal hygiene principles, and this we have to drum it into our children right from an early age. Number two, we must ensure adequate or good environmental hygiene. I mean, we were jumping up and down when there was a big announcement that Accra is going to be the cleanest city in West Africa. Kwame, if you go to all district assemblies and municipal assemblies, there's always an environmental health unit there. Kwame, we need to be up and doing. We need to do better because our state of environmental hygiene is really, 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 really not the best. Because if we don't have toilet facilities, for example, then people will do this free-ranging business. And that is where the whole thing starts from. So these are the first two steps. Another thing is what we call the school deworming program, under what we call the school health education program, which is a collaborative effort by the Ghana Education Service and the Ministry of Health. All right? Deworming is safe. So what we are saying is that because in our part of the world we concede that we've got all these challenges with our environment, the lack of toilet facilities, and so on and so forth, then we can't just sit on our hands and say we'll let our children, school-going age, develop worm infestation, miss school days, become anemic. Iron is very good for brain development of the child. I mean, instead of us thinking, oh, the children are not doing well and then issue corporal punishment or just pushing them to one side, if you are iron deficient, your brain doesn't develop very well and you have some cognitive impairment. So, to keep the children in school, to help them with brain development, and to make sure that they are living up to their full potential, we have a deworming program where once a year we go around the schools and using the teachers who are highly trained, skilled staff, we administer a very, very inexpensive drug called albendazole or mebendazole, which is, Kwame, one dose, irrespective of the child's age. Usually we do up to 14 years. One dose of this tablet just does the trick once a year. So I would encourage all parents who are listening that if you receive a notice from the school indicating that it's time for the yearly deworming program in the schools, it's a public health initiative. Even if you don't have worm infestation, it does no harm. Albendazole, mebendazole, they are very, very safe medicines for all age groups. So, Kwame, this is what I want to say about the prevention and control measures.
Okay, but generally, I mean, even adults as well, we need to deworm, isn't it?
Absolutely,
And how
absolutely.
often
But
should we?
right, so Kwame, a lot of this I will have to put some caveats in there. I have described to you the life cycle and how maintenance of personal hygiene and also the environment in which you live in. So, Kwame, you and I probably will not be typical individuals now going to play football bare feet and all of that. So, I want to put in that caveat, but I would say once a year, if you look at your circumstances, then I think once a year, go to your hospital, call up your family doctor, and say that, you know what, I think I need to come in to take my antihistamines or my worm medication. It will be a good thing to do. Because
Okay.
that's our public health policy.
All
But at
right.
a clinical level, if you look at your circumstances and individually, you don't want to, for this particular type of soil transmitted worm infestation, then that is also okay. But everybody needs to make that judgment call.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. For those who have more questions and they want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Right. So the team is always available. Phone number 0501 477 340. Our WhatsApp number is 0501 477 340. And we always continue the conversation on our social media pages. Medicals Hospitals, our Facebook page at Medicals GH is our X handle and Instagram as well.
All right. Doc, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you this afternoon, yeah?
My pleasure talking to you, Kwame, and definitely I'll see you next week in studio.
Great stuff. Good education this afternoon on worm infestation with a drive doctor, Dr. Ayao Safo. He's the CEO of Medicas Hospital, Medina Firestone, Mount Point, Equipim, and East Legon Hills. Yes. Stay tuned in. This is Joy 99.7 FM. Drive